It is an unbelievable night here in Minnesota. Beautiful weather, blue skies, perfect temp, light breeze. I'm super excited. Campfire? No. Sipping cocktails with your friends on the deck? Nope. Roasting marshmallows and telling stories? No. It's time to do a watch video. The NTH Dolphin Ice is what we're going to take a look at. Let's get after it.
So if you ain't got nothing better to do, let's waste some time.
All right, so in the world of microbrands, it's a big space. And when I got into watch collecting, microbrands quickly started showing up in my different social media feeds and also on a lot of YouTube influencers. And so I've stated before in other videos, I've been all over the microbrand. I think we're up to 60 or 70 different ones now. So I'm working on a pretty comprehensive video on my experience with microbrands because I think there's some things that I've experienced that I haven't seen talked about in other videos, or at least in total on other videos, maybe bits or parts. But today it's the NTH Dolphin Ice. Now, I think when you look at micro brands, there are a lot of brands that have models that I see called homages, that I would say are direct copies or nearly one-for-one replicas or rip-offs, depending on your point of view. And so I've often steered towards micro brands that do their own thing, or that I think properly do homage. Now, when I'm talking about properly doing an homage, I guess the best way I can explain it would be from this. So if you're familiar with the Star Wars movies, you know that as Anakin is being raised on the table there as Darth Vader, that George Lucas is doing an homage to Frankenstein. But you see that and you understand it. It gives you some context. It gives you perhaps a deeper appreciation for the scene itself, or an enjoyment to the scene itself if you know the story of Frankenstein. But it's not a one-for-one or a rip-off of Frankenstein. It is a nod, an homage, draws some inspiration. And I think that's what NTH does so well. When you look at their watches, some of the dial, the handsets, some of them are easily recognizable. You can see the Omega Sword hands or the Tudor Snowflake hands, but they're not a one-for-one for an Omega or for a Tudor. The case itself, the NTH subline, and that's what the review is covering, is their what they call the NTH subs. And the NTH subs are all the exact same case, just with different designs, all with the same movements. Miyota 9105, and then the no-date version of the 9105. But I think Nod to History is such a good name. They are tipping their hat to some older military sub, right, the NTH subline models, but they're not one-for-one. They're their own thing. They stand on their own, and I do appreciate that about this brand. So this review is going to be chopped up into kind of two sections. One is just a general overview of the subline, because like I said, they're all the same from a build standpoint. I feel like I can say review one NTH sub, you've reviewed them all except for the dial itself. And that's the second half of the review where we'll talk specifically about the NTH sub itself. So when we look at the packaging that comes with an NTH sub, it's a good bit of packaging. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it makes you feel like that the watch is that they took care to ship it to you, but they're not going overboard to the point. I think sometimes with microbrands you feel like, could they have put that money into maybe making the buckle a little bit better on the bracelet? And you know, if you've been in watch collecting, you know what I'm talking about. So I think they do the packaging just spot on for what they're trying to do. Now, the dimensions and just the rundown basic specs of all the NTH subs, you have a 40 millimeter case, you have 48 lug to lug, You have 300 meters of water resistance. It is 11.5 millimeters thin, I like to say. This is a thin watch. 20 millimeter lug width. The bracelet that comes with it tapers down to 18 until you get to the buckle. The buckle goes up to 21. You have a slightly domed sapphire crystal with anti-reflective treatment on it. So all their subs fit those categories. In addition to that, they all have drilled lugs. They have a signed loomed crown at 3 o'clock. They have a stainless steel bezel insert, and it's 120 click unidirectional. The bezel itself is firm, right? So some dig that. And it's even, I would say it's sometimes, depending on how well broken it is, it's even a little bit stiff, but there's zero, well, I'd say little to zero back play. It's just a good build and a good proportion. So how do all those dimensions translate into the enjoyment of the watch and the wearability of the watch? Well, if we look at it on my wife's 6 1/4 inch wrist and also on my 8 1/4 inch wrist, it is extremely wearable at those two ends of the spectrum. And there's not that many watches that both my wife and I could wear, and this is one of them. The watch, I think, wears smaller than 40, even though it has a 48 millimeter lug to lug. It's kind of a, I don't know if it's a trick on the eyes or trick on the mind, but the bezel on the NTH, as we can see right there, does not protrude out past the case. In fact, it's in from the case just a little bit there. And so the case you can actually see when it's on your wrist, but your eyes are looking at the dial here, which makes it feel smaller. And then even smaller still given the standard width of the bezel. So your actual dial space feels a little bit like a 38. And I think it wears very similar to my wife's Christopher Ward, which is a 38 or 39. So it's right in that real sweet spot for a lot of wrists. Very comfortable. The thinness of the watch, I would say, matches only a couple watches I've had that are that thin with at least 200 meters of water resistance, or even 300. The Omega Seamaster, if I get this number right, the 2531.80, the 90s version of the Omega Seamaster, which I'll be doing a review of here pretty quick. And the Glycine Combat Sub is thin like that. Very ergonomic, very comfortable. When you talk about the fit and finish across the NTH subs, every one I've had has been the same. The buckle is good to excellent with 6 micro adjustments. You have a signed fold over, I guess lockdown or fold over clasp. You have the double push button deployment on the buckle itself. So, and it's a milled clasp as well. So across their subline, I would give them, a B+, A-, A, depending on how finicky you want to be in terms of the fit, the finish, the wearability, the comfort. So when you look at an NTH, then you're really making one choice. Since their subline has all the specs and they build it well, then you are looking at dial designs. I think with the Dolphin Ice, when you look at this under the macros, this has a much dressier feel, which is interesting. It's the colorway with the silver, and I think ice is the perfect description. It has that frosty gray look, as you can see here. The indices are applied. The silver or steel hands are filled with the lume. The applied markers have that silver metal going around them with the lume on the inside. So you have, I think, a very dressy model with the Dolphin Ice, and that might be something that interests some of you who are looking to wear something that is kind of rugged and can handle the beach and some working around water, yet still look nice under a sport coat. And I think the Dolphin Ice does. I'm not, if you've seen my videos, I'm not big into the fashion aspects of watches. I think you should wear what you enjoy. But the Dolphin Ice is a very, I would say, dressy design compared to some of their other ones, and I very much enjoyed looking at it. The dial is a gray kind of sunburst effect, which just adds to that unique or dressy feel. The one thing I can't speak to, and I'll be interested in, is I don't have very many watches with a stainless steel bezel to see how that ages. You know, the ceramic ones are the rage because of their ability to sort of retain their newness. They don't scratch very easily. Some like the aluminum because if it's a watch that's well worn and you've taken on many adventures and journeys, maybe you have a couple of love scratches in it, the things that give watches character, or the aluminum sometimes can fade to give it a very interesting look. I honestly don't know how stainless steel will age and wear over time, but I'll be curious to see that with a couple watches I have that have that. When you go out to NTH, YouTube videos, Instagram, or even articles, you're going to come across two things that I'll touch on here that people often cite as negatives. Well, three, but one is a ridiculous negative. The ridiculous one is the case back being plain. And I just don't think that's something that is worth mentioning in terms of dinging a watch. You know, I have watches with very interesting designs on the back that are part of their design language, right? Helm with their H on the back. They've been doing that for a long time. The Omega Seamaster, the Seiko with their wave on the back. And I think that can add to the watch, but I don't think it's certainly necessary. I mean, you look on the back of a Tudor or Rolex, what are people doing cartwheels on that one about? So the back doesn't bother me at all. If you're going to go plain, that's fine. No issues with that at all. The other two things I think are a little bit worth a little bit more discussion. One, you know, at near $700, I see a lot of people talk about they would rather it be a Swiss movement. And I get it, the reputation of the Swiss, and typically when you start paying, you know, $675, $650, $700, a lot of microbrands use Solitas. But I got to be honest, a lot of them use Miyotas too. The Miyota 9100 series has a better power reserve. They're very, very durable. I find most of them to be as accurate or better than some of my Solita-based watches. So I got zero issues with the Miyota movement. Some, I would say, microbrands that I think are built with less quality than the NTH, I notice the rotor noise or the rotor spinning more. I haven't noticed that with any of the NTHs. I mean, if I try, I can hear it. And everyone knows if you have the Miyota, right, you get that noise. But it's not something that has attracted from my enjoyment of any of the NTH watches because I don't notice it like I have on some others. So if you're going to use the Miyota, though, I think you have to do what NTH does. And the reason to use the Miyota, other than cost perhaps and having better margins, although I don't know that to be the case, and I honestly don't care, is the thinness of the movement. It's definitely thinner than the Solita or the ETA. And so NTH capitalized on it. They worked to build a watch that took advantage of the thinness. And so for that, I appreciate that. That's an outstanding use of the Miyota movement. So the last thing that I think is the fairest of all the criticisms is the price at $675. Is that expensive for a well-built watch? Everyone knows that's not the case. But is it a bargain for what you're getting in terms of a spec sheet? It is not a bargain. Is it fair? Yep, I would say it's on the high end of fair. I would say if we talk about it, I always say it's on the dark side of the gray. It's at the edge of being a fair price. And I think how you feel about the price is going to be determined solely on your interaction with the brand and what you think is a reasonable premium to pay for a micro brand with an interesting design. Because there are some very popular micro brands that are anywhere from $300 to $150 less, with some with better specs, some depending on what you think about movements, or bracelets will have some debate on whether or not they're better. But it's a very, very competitive space at nearly $700 for a Miyota-based watch. But I'll tell you, the Seal Watch Company uses it, and they charge more than $675 on some of their watches. Helson uses the Miyota, and they're 675, 650. So they're not out of line. It's just extremely competitive for the spec sheet and the movement. And that's something you have to decide by looking around. But you're certainly not getting ripped off. You're certainly not overpaying. You just might be paying for a full amount. The difficulty with trying to get a deal on NTH watches, if you don't care about dial design and you just want an NTH, you can hover around eBay. You can buy them like new, brand new, or from a really good seller for $450 to $600. So there is some bargains to be had, but because these watches are made in limited quantities, because they're just not always in stock on the website or through their authorized dealers, if there's a specific dial design you're shooting for, you could wait forever because they're just not, like out on eBay today before I came out here, there's not a single Dolphin Ice out there. So if this is the one you want, I might have it up on my eBay store in a day or two. But other than that, it's not out there, right? So if you want any NTH, and again, all their subs are built the same, so you do get that for the purchase price, but you may not get the dial you want if you want a deal on it. So that's all I have to say about the price there. So at the end of the day, I'm a fan of NTH watches. I'm a fan of their unique take on homage. They do it right, in my opinion. They build also a quality watch. They thought about the design. They thought about the case shape and wearability. They cared about the finishing, the look, the feel. And then you decide as the consumer, do I like the dial design enough for the 675? Do I think there are other brands out there with better specs for a little bit less money? Sure, that's always the case, no matter what brand you're talking about, right? So that's where we'll wrap it. I hope you enjoyed the video. This one went kind of long, and it's just such a nice night out. I felt like I was telling stories out here and sitting around with some friends. So thanks for hanging out. Check me out on Instagram, and another video will be coming soon.